Longlegs, directed by Osgood Perkins, stars Maika Monroe and Nicolas Cage. In pursuit of a serial killer, an FBI agent uncovers a series of occult clues that she must solve to end his terrifying killing spree. This is one film I've been excited about since it started being advertised, and on top of that, the marketing leading up to it has done such a stellar job at generating hype and being expertly crafted to be cryptic and creepy as hell. There were numerous reasons I've been interested in checking out this, mainly for the reason of Nicolas Cage being in this and hearing who it's directed by. For those who don't know, Osgood Perkins is the son of acclaimed actor Anthony Perkins, most known for his role obviously as Norman Bates. So with all this leading up to it, I've been very excited to check this out. I'll talk about this film's performances. Firstly, I think Maika Monroe does a really great job in this. Right when our character is introduced, you get the sense that something is troubling her mind, and granted at first glance this could be as simple of feeling the pressures of her job on her, but from her mannerisms and the way she interacts with some people, it's clear it goes deeper than that. There looks to be something slightly broken within her, and I think subtly she's able to convey that really well. Another thing she does well here is the other aspect of her character, who is very strong-willed and determined. She's clearly really good at her job, and she's able to uncover the mystery on what's going on almost all on her own. It helped keep me completely interested all the way through. She's less of a scream queen in this, and I feel like that helps add to her character too, as she's able to convey so much fear and terror when she's faced with a lot of fucked up things her character has to deal with in this movie. On top of that, there's points where she has to suppress that fear and hold everything together in an attempt not to be outsmarted by any adversaries that comes across her, and it felt very real when it came to these moments too. So here's the thing that people are all rightfully raving about when it comes to talking about this movie. It's time to talk about Nick Cage. Nick Cage is genuinely fantastic in this. I'm one of the people that is an essential god defender of Nick Cage. The guy is a good actor. He just has horrible money problems and takes anything he can get. So you see him in this pile of really terrible movies, and then you remember he's done some pretty great movies too, and he's pulled some really great performances out of that. This film is one of them. As soon as the movie starts, you get a feel for how unnerving he's going to be, and anytime he's on screen, he just makes you incredibly uncomfortable with such simple mannerisms and also very big in-your-face moments. They give him the freedom to let out his crazy side that we've seen him do in so many other movies, and for me, when these moments came on display, they worked so much. There's a scene where he's in a car and he's screaming this sentence in such a pitch where, yes, it is a laughable scene, but that shows the balance he brings to this role. Not only is he menacing, not only is he creepy, but he is just really fucking funny too. I love certain aspects of his character. I love the idea that he's a former glam rocker who, judging by his lair, worships Mark Bolan. For those who don't know, he is the lead singer of the band T.rex, a band that is featured heavily in this movie soundtrack. I love they gave that minimal backstory to him. I have a love-hate relationship with the way his face looks in this movie. I think as good as the marketing is, they really overhyped how he was going to look here. I was under the impression they were going to completely transform him and have him be unrecognizable, but you can still pretty easily tell it's Nick Cage. However, in context of the movie, I love that he looks this way because he went to get so many different plastic surgeries that ended up being botched. At least that's what the director says about his look. It makes for a pretty disfigured looking face that makes sense realistically why he would look like that. Surprisingly enough, he's not in the movie all that much. He's one of these villains where his presence is felt more off screen than on screen. But the times where he's on screen, he's great. I briefly also want to mention Kiernan and Shipka's performance in this, and also say I had seen her in Twisters this same week, and my dumb brain couldn't make the connection that these were the same people. It doesn't help that she looks different in both movies, but they're both completely different performances, and it just shows such an impressive range from these two movies alone. She only has one scene in this movie, but she makes the most of it by having this nice balance of seeming innocent while also being pretty creepy. She's doing this pseudo Gollum voice too, which was an interesting choice, but it definitely adds a lot to her performance in this. Her scene was just one of the many parts that really stuck with me, and I think that's solely down to her performance alone. She was just great. This film looks amazing. The cinematography throughout the whole thing is so great to look at. The opening, starting with this Polaroid 3:4 aspect ratio, was a nice little touch, and this look gets used constantly whenever it wants to show that it takes place in the past, which was a really nice touch. There's just so many countless shots that I loved, and some of them, when you look at it, granted, are so simple, but they always looked fantastic. There's a bit near the beginning where Lee, Maika Monroe's character, is infiltrating a house. She has her gun pointing in front of her, and it looks like it's nearly about to hit the lens of the camera. It essentially invade your comfort zone and is a nice way to, again, very early on, make you feel very uncomfortable. The color palette is really great here too, and it's complemented well by the lighting in so many scenes. A lot of rooms are dimly lit and almost completely pitch black, and it makes for interesting and satisfying to look at compositions in this too. There's about 4 tracking shots which is slightly tilted down to look behind the camera, and it somehow hits hard every single time they do it here. It helps that this type of shot just looks great no matter what. Even when there's horrific things on screen, the film manages to shoot them in a way that just makes it look aesthetically pleasing. There were a few times I had to remind myself to pay attention to the plot because I would just admire how stunning this whole thing looked. The whole buzz about this film is that it's supposed to be the scariest movie of the year, nay, the decade, and naturally, when I review horror movies, I give the rundown on whether it is scary or not. So is this movie actually scary as people say? Well, no, but it certainly comes close to being an actual scary horror movie. It's on the level of terror I felt the very first time I watched Texas Chainsaw. That movie never actually scared me, but it did really unnerve me on first watch. And I always considered that movie was very close to being an actual scary horror movie. This film does something similar where a good chunk of it is incredibly unsettling. I think what makes it so is more of things that are implied more than anything. And this is where it gets a little hard to speak about, as some of the really well-written creepy stuff do delve into spoiler territory, and I don't want to give much away about this, as it's much more fulfilling going into this as blind as the trailers leave you. Obviously, one of the main things that works regarding the creepy moments is down to Nick Cage and his performance. Just every aspect of it, pretty much. We don't actually see many of the killings that happen in this, at least until pretty late into the movie, but the ones we never see and only hear or hear of makes for some very chilling moments. There's very minimal jump scares in this too. Thankfully, the film relies more on creepiness and tension throughout rather than cheap jump scares. There's probably 2 in the whole movie, and they're done surprisingly well. Another thing that surprised me was the movie had such a good soundtrack. I didn't think a horror movie could have such an upbeat soundtrack, but this film opts to have 5 T.rex needle drops, and I love the hell out of it. Whenever these songs would play, obviously there's an in-movie reason for why it's here, and having it here was very welcome. There's such heavy influence in this that it's hard to ignore. The most obvious one is it being compared to Silence of the Lambs, a procedural thriller mystery that also gets roped into being a horror movie, but is also one of those horror movies that's insanely respected, especially when award seasons happen around the time of that movie's release. I don't know if Longlegs will be as respected as that movie, mainly due to some of the choices in the third act, which again, I sadly can't say due to spoilers. There were multiple times I felt the influence of Seven over this movie too, for a couple of reasons, especially in terms of how a lot of the dimly lit scenes look. Another Fincher movie that comes to mind in terms of this film influence is also obviously Zodiac, as there's this big mystery to Longlegs, and due to the fact that he's a cryptic serial killer leaving all of these clues around. It's just really appreciated seeing the love for all these types of movies shine through in this film. Overall, I just love everything about this film. It does so many things right, and it's an example of a modern horror movie that will stand the test of time for being just how good it is, and that really is elevated by the marketing campaign. I feel like in a couple of years, the marketing campaign for this movie will be talked about in the same breath as the one for the Blair Witch's marketing campaign. I was hooked from start to finish in a packed theater too, and the atmosphere was so infectious, as you could tell nearly the whole audience was engaged on what was going on. I think that helps, as it's one of those horrors you can't really take your eyes away from, even if there's moments where you wish you could. I'm giving Longlegs 5 stars. It's incredibly stunning and well shot. It's so well written. Its performances from everyone involved are fantastic, helmed amazingly by both Maika Monroe and Nick Cage especially. It's chilling, it's unnerving, it showcases an impressive execution of suspense and tension, and is somehow surprisingly really fun under so much darkness. I'm never going to forget about my first experience watching this film, and if you take anything from this review, all I have to say is to seek it out as soon as you can, preferably on the big screen, as it's an original horror movie that deserves such a treatment.